everyone! So today I'm going to talk about all of the books that I finished in March. So let's just get into it. So the first book that I finished in March was The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. This is a quick novella. It took me about an hour and 15 minutes to read, and I gave it 4 stars. Ernest Hemingway said something along the lines of like, any symbolism that you find in the novel is something that you've read into it, like I just wrote a story. I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what he said. And I just love that. That's such an uplifting thing for me as like a reader and also somebody who was brought up in literary criticism. I love that an author is kind of being like, hey, by the way, a lot of that's crap. I really like that he pointed that out. The symbolism that I saw was you can try with all of your might and you might still fail, and that's okay. You just get back up and you go back out and you do it over again. But it's not so much about winning or losing, it's more about the journey. It's the human condition. In general, beautiful writing, excellent imagery. I really liked the battle with the fish itself, and then also with the sharks. It's a very simple novel, but I think that's what makes it special. So the next book that I finished in March was A Lesson Before Dying by Ernest J. Gaines. I actually gave this book 5 stars, which was rare for me. I read it in about 3 hours and 14 minutes. So some things about this book. It was incredibly poignant, very, very sad, but in a way that it was kind of a good thing. This book is speaking about the same things that like civil rights movements have been speaking about for years, that there is a lot of injustice, especially in the Black community. It was a very accurate display of 40s Louisiana, especially in a small town. Most of the town was still on a plantation. Most of the town was still run by the man who owned a plantation, so even though everybody is free, they still had to do a lot of what that man said, and he still affected how everybody made decisions in that town based around that one man. So really, it was kind of pointing out like how much has changed. Like, are we really free? And I thought that was heartbreaking but honest. It was a very heart-wrenching novel. The ending happened the way it should have, despite it being so awful. Like, I hate that it happened, but I'm happy that he wrote it that way because it really depicts the injustice, and it's the way that it should have been written to point that out. The characters were a little weak except for our main character, Grant, but I think that's because this book was more about his transformation and his journey than it was about any other character. So though the plot was important, it's really more a character-driven novel. But the one bad thing about that is it does feel like a lot of the other people were just fluff to help him get there, but that wasn't too much of a deterrent for me because it was still a really, really fantastically written novel. Anyways, this book's really good. I highly suggest it. It's great. The next book that I finished in March was The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. This book, I rated it 4 stars, and it took me about 4 hours and 10 minutes to read. First thing I want to say, no idea what the plot meant. Like, it was all over the place. Well, it definitely was not a chronological novel. You go from one character to another, and you don't really know that you're shifting to other personalities because they're numbered chapters. They're not character chapters, but then you do shift to personalities, and you at first you're like, what is happening? So there is that part about it, but that didn't make it any less of a good novel. Once I really got into it and understood what was going on, this is highly, highly, highly a character-based novel. So if you're into that, it's great. If you're not, you're probably not gonna like it. Some other things, it had some great philosophical discussions about love and about animals. The importance of either of those topics to you, especially with love. One's definition of love can differ from human to human. Like, you think that you're doing the right thing by someone else based on your definition of love, but their definition of love is so different that they're actually hurt by it. And so I just thought that was really intriguing because it is very human. We aren't all the same, and even though media tells us exactly certain definitions of how love should be, that doesn't mean that it actually is that way. We all have different emotions and different feelings. We're not cookie cutter humans. So I was really happy that he wrote that in that way. Also, this was a very atmospheric novel. I felt really drawn in. It was nice to read about a lot of Czech history. The writing was gorgeous. As you can probably tell by all of my tabs, these are all great quotes. I think there are over like 20 of them, maybe more. It wasn't very intriguing plot-wise. So I wasn't like, oh my gosh, what happens? I need to know. But it was so beautifully written that I still didn't want to put it down because it was just very delicate and flowery in a way that was interesting. It was a really good book. I would suggest it. So the fourth book that I read in March is my first rant. The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway. I read it in about 2 hours and 10 minutes and I gave it 1 star. It was awful. Now, keep in mind, I actually like Hemingway's writing style. This has nothing to do with writing style. In fact, I even said that it was written well. All of my issues had to do with the characters, the plot line, and the way that he depicted just scenarios and characters that honestly, some of it was just abhorrent to me. So the first thing that pissed me off the most about this book was that I found it incredibly anti-Semitic. I've removed all of my flags from it, but I had almost 50 flags for it being problematic. Just a lot of stereotypes. And it wasn't like it was just one problematic character. It was several characters, and they all were saying these kind of things. It would even be in the prose by the narrator. So it's not like I'm angry at him for writing a problematic character. It was a problematic novel for me. Disgusting stereotypes that should never be mentioned. I don't care that this book was written in the 20s. Like, honestly, that almost makes it worse because that's really in the like heyday of when Jewish people were being severely mistreated all across the globe. The second one that I didn't like, but I tried to kind of let go of because of the fact that it was written in the 20s, was that there was only one female character. Technically, there were 2 others in the background, one named one, I think her name was Emma, but of course she had little to no personality. She was essentially like a paper cutout girl that was just there as a prop. But, you know, Brett did actually have a personality. So, first thing, she dated several dudes, which is fine, but if it's the only female character, it instead makes me feel that that was more of Hemingway writing females that way, which was upsetting. And also, having read The Old Man and the Sea, there weren't really any females in there either, so in the 30 years that he was writing novels, it's like nothing changed. There was the fact that like she really only dated them for money or for like having a good time. She would say that she was in love with people, but really the only person that she was truly in love with was Jake, the main character slash narrator. She didn't want to be with the man that she was in love with because he was impotent. And though I'm happy that Hemingway did represent like something that I don't feel is in novels an awful lot, I don't appreciate the way that he characterized females for treating that character because of that. Also, like, every man we meet in the novel falls in love with her. Like, every single one. Every single one. It's just unbelievable. Like, she could, no matter how beautiful she was, no matter how, like, enchanting and enamoring she was, there's no plausible way that every single male would have been like, I'm now in love with her. I just don't, it's so unbelievable that it was just kind of, like, cringy. I didn't like that. I hated almost every single character. Jake was fine, like the narrator, he was fine. Most people were not lovable. And then the settings were also just a bit too similar for me. Like, it takes place in France and in Spain, and sometimes it was kind of hard to tell that you were definitively in Spain unless you were at a bullfight or you knew that they were fishing. I don't know, it just wasn't engaging. The characters pissed me off, and I really did not like the characterization of Jewish people. It was insulting. So 1 star, and I guarantee you I'm going to be unhauling this soon. Alright, so the next book that I finished in March was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I'm actually excited. I finished this one before I thought I would, because I said in my TBR that it would take me longer than March, but it didn't. Yay. My book club's going to be going over this one this week, I think. I'm super excited. This book was really good. I gave it 4 stars. It took me about 5.5 hours to read. This book was like really, really cool, super atmospheric. I really, really liked her style of what the apocalypse would look like. It reminded me a lot of the Fallout game series if you play video games. It was really creepy in some parts. There was some mystery involved and it was just really good. I liked all of that about it. Some I was just like, oh, what a badass. I like her a lot. Or just like hearing the background of some of the other characters, because you've got like a past plot and then you've got a recent plot going on. It had a kind of a similar structure to The Unbearable Lightness of Being, where you're just like, I don't know what character I'm dealing with. But this one was a lot more artful about the plot. Like you could clearly tell that this was a plot-based novel, while that one was a character-based novel. It wasn't chronological though. If Quentin Tarantino made a book about Fallout, it would be this book. That's kind of how I would describe it. But it was really good. I really liked it. Some of my criticisms, I guessed the villain really early on, so that kind of disappointed me. I liked being surprised. That was kind of annoying. I also felt like the ending was a bit rushed. I was just like, is that really the way you want to end it? So that kind of stung for me. It did make me knock it down a 1/2 star because of that. I did not want it to end the way that it did, and then it did end that way, and I was just like, it just felt too easy. That didn't discount from the rest of the book. The journey was great. I just didn't like the ending. I would give this one about a 4.5 is what I would rank this book. I think I said 4 earlier, but yeah, I think 4.5. Other than the rushed ending and not quite being happy with the villain, which kind of had to do with the rushed ending, I thought this book was great. I'm glad that it lived up to the hype too, because a lot of people have been talking about it on BookTube for forever. So I'm really, really happy that it was a lot better than I thought it would be. So the last book that I finished in March was Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. I gave this one 3 stars and I read it in, I think, about 2 hours. It's a lot shorter than it looks because the font was huge in this book. The plot was absurd, and which makes sense. It's a satire and I get that, and sometimes I'm like, maybe satires just aren't for me, but I like a lot of the things that they have to say when it comes to like politics or science or like the way that the world could go, so I still pick them up. Again, though, the writing style of this book, very difficult to follow. Some things I'd say about this: the book is clearly anti-war. I've seen some reviews floating out that say that it's not, and I'm just like, are we not reading the same book? I don't understand. The original title of this book was actually The Children's Crusade, which makes sense because he makes a point several times in the book that war is fought by babies. And he's not wrong, especially when this book was written. Like, it was written in 1969, which would have been right around the Vietnam War. That was when really, really, really people were upset by the draft because everybody felt like it was an unjust war. And then people got drafted, and then they came back, and then people treated them terribly afterwards. Wars are fought by kids, so I'm glad that he pointed that out. He also was saying things like, war is inevitable, which is terrifying and sad, but probably not untrue. I mean, war is seen throughout all species, not just humans. We just happen to have the intelligence and creativity to create weapons of destruction that are just a lot harsher than a chimpanzee's, you know. But chimpanzees still go to war. If you didn't know, chimpanzees are in the Stone Age. They actually fight wars with rocks and sticks right now. It's kind of terrifying, but also kind of neat at the same time. They do stab other chimpanzees with sticks and throw rocks at them. Like, it's a thing. They're in the Stone Age. It's like really neat. If you're into nihilism as a school of thought, this is a really good book for that. Big part of this book. He was pointing out that life is pointless. Like, what is the purpose of human life if we're just going to destroy everything around us? So there's like this whole subplot that's kind of sci-fi where your character Billy Pilgrim believes that he's being abducted by aliens called the Tremolfadorians. It's up to you whether or not you think the sci-fi plot is real for the novel. So there's that. He mentions how the Tremolfadorians view humans as like long millipedes, going from beginning to end, being like when they're born to when they die. So they don't see dead people, they see a millipede, which is an interesting perspective. So they don't believe that anybody ever really dies, because you live on for forever, because people will always remember you. So I guess in some ways that's kind of uplifting. I gave it 3 stars just because the plot was like a lot for me. But other than that, I did like it. I liked a lot of what it had to say. So these are the 6 books that I read in March. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these and what you thought about them. Do you disagree with any of my opinions? I'd love to hear what you have to say. Anyways, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you around.